If you're a knowledge worker today and you get paid for coming up with and executing on great ideas, you owe it to yourself to read Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker. And I'm going to lay out some of the big ideas that he has here. And so here's just the good parts of managing oneself. I think it's pretty hard to overstate what a huge impact Peter Drucker has had, and especially this book. Beyond doing things like coining the term knowledge worker, which is now super popular, it also paved the way and laid the structural foundation for books like Jim Collins' Good to Great and Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek and tons of other business and productivity books that you may have heard of. So who is this Peter Drucker guy, and why is this book so special? Forbes calls Peter Drucker the founder of modern management, and I don't think they're too far off. But simply put, he's one of the most influential and highly prolific business writers of the last century. He was born in Austria, got some experience in the business world, but really made his dent as a writer, an author, and an educator, studying management and business as a whole. And his key insight that he got to earlier than anyone else back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s was that people are going to be at the center of this big new shift in business, and the relationships you have with each other and with yourself are really going to affect who wins and who loses in this new economy where ideas are the main output, not just physical goods. And this book is a really concise distillation of this idea. Really, the core theme of the book is that everyone is a manager now, whether you like it or not. And so how do you become a good CEO of, yourself? Because it didn't always used to be this way. If you were a peasant, it's probably true that your father was a peasant and that was all you were consigned to do. Same thing if your dad was a farmer, you're going to be a farmer too. You didn't have a lot of upward mobility. But now, when you have so much opportunity at your fingertips, it's all about how well you manage your opportunities and your time, not just today, although that is important, but over the coming decades. And so this is what Peter Drucker lays out, a plan to manage yourself, to develop yourself, just like any great CEO would with his own team and organization. And to make that happen, there's a few core rules that you need to understand. Number one, he really hammers this home, and it's so helpful in mind shifting, is to double down on your strengths and forget about your weaknesses. Ignore them or delegate them. He puts it pretty simply, a person can perform only from strength. One cannot build performance on weakness, let alone something you can't do at all. The whole point here is to place yourself where your strengths, the things that you're wired for and you're passionate about and can really make a dent on, where you can have the most impact. So you're not spending all your time trying to cobble together your mental resources and trying to cover over things that you're not that good at in the first place. One of the major keys to actually making sure that this happens is to make sure that you're not being what he calls intellectually arrogant. Another way I'd say this is really just making sure that you're being self-aware, that you understand what you truly are good at and what you're truly not great at, so that you can put yourself in a place where you're doubling and tripling down on your strengths and ignoring or delegating or supplementing yourself with people who can cover over your weaknesses. And so that brings us to the second key idea of the book, which is the importance of constant feedback analysis on your performance so that you can develop your best career. To this end, Drucker says, successful careers aren't planned. They only develop when people are prepared for opportunities because they know their strengths, their values, and how they work best. This is huge because even an ordinary person with pretty average skills, if they're continuously asking themselves a few key questions, seeing where they're falling short, seeing where they're excelling, and how they can improve over the long term, can become a star performer just by continuously going back to the drawing board, making some tweaks, and doing this as a regular ritual and habit to develop themselves like their own CEO. In order for this to happen, though, you also have to understand how you operate so that you can manage yourself effectively. And he really lays out 6 key questions you need to ask yourself to make sure that you're an effective boss for yourself. First rule, am I a reader or am I a listener? If the information isn't getting into your head so that you can process it and make the best decisions, you need to shift your learning style to make sure that you're giving yourself the best fighting chance. Rule number 2, How do you learn? Are you a writer or are you a talker? This is a critical difference because if you're a writer, you need to sit down with a pen and paper, with an empty notes, and really help things fall into place by formulating ideas and outlines and sentences. But if you're a talker, it might do better to record yourself a memo or to have a trusted friend or advisor or sounding board to make sure you can really pivot your ideas to the best place. If you don't understand this, then your ideas won't be as good as they could be, or you won't refine them in the right ways. Number 3, do you understand whether you're more of a lone wolf or whether you produce your best work with people naturally? Of course, I think effective executives and people in general need to do both, but do you understand where your best work comes from? So you're not trying to bend over backwards constantly when you're trying to get past a hard problem, and just understanding, again, where you shine. Number 4, if you do work with people, which types of people and relationships do you work best with? Where do you have natural compatibility, and where do you really need to put in that extra time and effort in order to just collaborate productively with another person? Understanding that and being able to spot those people and align yourselves with them and really form a beneficial relationship between you, the few of you, can really go a long ways rather than just constantly butting heads. Number 5, do you produce results best as a decision maker or as an advisor to someone who actually makes that decision? This can be huge because it can, if you're trying to act like a decision maker, but that's just not your natural bent, it's going to feel unnatural, and vice versa. If you feel best going deep in one area and advising someone, laying out all the information, and then going along with it, it's kind of the difference between, your natural comfort as a number 1 or as a number 2. And lastly, number 6, understanding your values deeply. Knowing the things that you won't budge in yourself, and just knowing where your passions lie at a really deep level. Another interesting point he makes is really understanding these 6 questions, how you collaborate, what your natural bent is, where you're most productive, what your values are. These all apply outside yourself into helping you understand where you're most effective in an organization, how to understand how to get your best performance out of your coworkers and other people by understanding their values, their modes of work, how they're wired. But it all starts with yourself because that's where you have the most control. So you've asked yourself these questions, you've built up this feedback analysis, and you're thinking as your own boss. The next thing you want to do is plan ahead, but not too far. His next key is never plan ahead more than 18 months. Of course, all planning is really just a bet on what's going to happen in the future. And so anything further out than 18 months really isn't that clear, and it won't be specific. So it's really more harm than good at that point. What you should really be doing instead is asking yourself, how can I make the most impact on the things that are right for me over the next year and a half? That's where you're going to have the most realistic and useful planning that actually helps you move the ball forward, but doesn't float off into some kind of fantasy land. One of the last ideas that he really covers in this book is really making sure that you're not setting yourself to burn up in this kind of midlife crisis, right? Because this is what a lot of experienced executives go through. They do the same job year in, year out for decade on decade, and about halfway through, they just burn out and hit this midlife crisis because they've peaked out in their career and they haven't really thought about how to pivot themselves into the next thing that they're good at. And so they kind of end up really dissatisfied or just not loving where they're at. And so if you want to avoid a midlife crisis in your career, Drucker's advice is really just don't get bored. Make sure that you're actively managing yourself like a good boss would, and recognize when you're not stretching yourself, when you're not getting into new areas, and maybe even start proactively planning that second phase of your career for the last 20, 30, 40 years, and doing something where you can sort of springboard off the things that were exciting in the first half and that helped you grow that expertise. And I think if you look at a lot of executives, either they create this in their own company, or they create other opportunities that they can launch themselves into next. And it definitely resonates a lot when I look at people in marketing, growth, and business that I follow too. So in summary, Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker is, I would say, a non-negotiable read if you're working with ideas and want to be productive and shape a career that matters and doesn't leave you flat halfway through when you're encountering this midlife crisis. It helps you be proactive and plan at the right level of specificity. Make sure you're implementing this powerful habit of feedback analysis, that you're always learning what you should delegate away and stop doing, and where you're being most effective with yourself and with other people. I know it's changed how I think about my career, not just in the short term, but in terms of making big leaps and preparing for the future, and not just letting my career happen to me. And so I hope this was really helpful. I'd highly recommend go check it out in your library or Amazon if you haven't before. And let me know how this has helped you make more intentional habits and plans around your career. I'd love to hear what you think.